Mike Rowan.
Casey Cook, hello, my friend.
Hey.
It is December. It is the holiday season that is usually filled with lots and lots of choral singing. So this year it's a little different. I know I'm used to being out at rehearsals one night, performances the next night. You grab a drink afterwards, you see your friends, you go to a holiday party, rinse, repeat, and it just kind of like that's kind of the life for choral singers in December. But not quite the same this year. How's your December going, Casey?
Yeah, it feels a little different, you know. I'm used to going out into the stores doing Christmas shopping, hearing, Mariah Carey over and over again, or all the different Christmas carols you normally hear in any shop. Um, or like you going to rehearsals, getting my, winter concert or Christmas concert or singing in different groups and feeling the feel of like, okay, one more day I can do this, I can get past this. And this year it doesn't feel the same.
Oh,
Um, even though lots of things are still going on, just like that daily grind of getting ready for rehearsals, it doesn't feel like Christmas right now. How are you and your family doing in Michigan?
well, it is really nice to be with my family in Michigan because I get some more of that sort of like holiday season time than I usually would. I'd usually be singing in Christmas Eve in DC and then fly home on Christmas Day. So I feel like that's giving me a little bit more time to enjoy some of the traditions, which is sort of new and different in a way for me. So that's helping. But so the feeling because we've been doing all these virtual choirs
Mm-hmm.
and you're singing, you've got like a really good take, and then you get to the end and you just like you make a mistake and you have to
You make
start
that
all over
one
again.
little mistake. Oh, I got to do the whole thing over again.
Yeah. So like my family and I, because my dad is the handbell director at our family's church, we're doing a little handbell quartet of Carol of the Bells,
Right,
very well-known choral piece. We
right,
get to the very last note, literally the last
right at
bong.
the end. Yep.
Yep. And so like I ring my bell, my dad rings my bell, and his bell like clangs like really
Oh,
loudly into another bell that's just sitting there on the table. And he just goes, ah.
do you have to reshoot the whole thing?
Well, I mean that the ironic thing was that was the best take. So I think we're gonna try to do some audio splicing in there and just
Okay.
like keep that whole video. But you know, like tis the prime example of like our frustrations with virtual choral life, trying to celebrate our holiday
Mm,
traditions. It kind of just that just kind of brought it all together for me.
yep. And we have some great guests that are joining us today that will be talking about taking the typical virtual, typical live event and translating it into a virtual setting.
Yep, we're trying our best to celebrate traditions that we know and love. And Casey, you were saying this earlier that we know it's not what we're used to all the time, but we're doing the best we can. And a group that is really doing the best at doing the best they can and really incorporating some really interesting new virtual elements is the National Lutheran Choir based in the Twin Cities, Minnesota. And so we have Tina Meckel, their executive director, joining us. And Tina's been a really active member in some of our, member forums that we've been having this fall, trying to catch up with choruses on how they're handling the pandemic, and has really had a lot of great things to share. And then Sara Langworthy, who has her own production company, DeveloPlay, but also has been really involved in the choir for some years and has been involved with us since well before the pandemic, presenting at our conferences and things like that on a number of topics dealing with marketing and video and digital, all that stuff, when we were still performing live and in person. And as you and I both know and love Casey,
Our
she's one of the
favorite.
co-hosts.
Yeah, Beer Choir, our favorite. So I'm super excited to welcome Tina and Sarah here to this episode of ChorTechs.
Welcome, everybody. So glad to be with you today. I'm joined by Tina Meckel, Executive Director of National Lutheran Choir. Hi, Tina.
Hi, Mike. Thanks for having me today.
It's a pleasure. And I'm also here with Sara Langworthy, the owner of DeveloPlay. Hi, Sara.
Hi, I'm very glad to be here as well.
And as usual, I've got my co-host and colleague Casey Cook over here. Casey, you just celebrated a birthday.
Yep, just yesterday as we record this.
Yeah, awesome. Sara, Tina, do you have any birthdays around this time by any chance?
January, it's,
That's
it's
coming
a little
up.
ways away, but coming up.
Yeah.
Happy
Sarah,
birthday, Casey.
Thank you.
is your birthday January 9th?
10th.
10th. Okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
my daughter's is the 9th. So pretty
Oh,
close
yay.
to Christmas. But
Yeah.
Well, people might be watching this in January, so happy early birthday to Sara. My birthday is November 1st, which is All Saints
All
Day,
Saints Day.
which in the church liturgical calendar is a traditional day to remember um, everyone in the church who has passed away in the past year. There's this tradition usually that local churches have. They will say the name of each person who died and then ring a bell, which is just a very memorable tradition. And so this sort of brings us into December, where a lot of us have traditions that we are celebrating, but in 2020, we're celebrating them or trying our best in a very different way. We're not able to be together. And there is just like a sense of losing, what we've been able to celebrate, and sometimes people, but also just being in an unfamiliar place and having to try some things new, which is hard emotionally and technically. But we're here to talk with Tina and Sara, who have been doing a lot of work in this domain, and I think have a lot of awesome things to share about this. And one thing that's coming up very soon is your annual holiday program. Tina, do you want to talk a little bit about that, what that is?
yeah, that's really, well, like a lot of choruses, that's sort of our flagship event of the year. And, in a typical year, there will be several thousand people who attend this Advent and Christmas service slash concert slash festival of carols and scripture and poetry. And it really is, it goes back to the very beginning of the organization, but it really is a deep tradition for many of our followers. Like they often tell us, well, my holiday season doesn't start until I participate in this event. Um, and it is quite strange to not be doing it in person this year. But we do feel that there are ways we can bring the tradition to people this year. And we think that's really important because it is such a hard time, and we think that all of us need it.
Yeah, absolutely. What you're saying is so true. And Sara, you've been brought in and, having worked with the National Lutheran Choir a lot, um, to try to help make these traditions a reality in the virtual space. So what was it like when I guess you first started to plan and try to put some of these programs together to help this out?
Yeah, that's a great question. It is sort of the where do you start question, because there's so much you can't do. And I think for so many of us at various points in the pandemic, right, we've hit this wall of like, but I can't do the thing I'm used to doing. What do I do instead? How do I adapt? How do I pivot? How do I change? And so for us, with the Christmas program, it's this challenge of how do you bring that feeling and how do you bring that experience to a virtual space? There are certain things that you can't translate to a virtual space. It's just not possible. But there, I would argue, are also things that you can't translate from a virtual space to an in-person space. Like there are unique things that we can do within the scope of this virtual program that we would never be able to do if we were doing it live, at the Basilica like we typically do every year. And so that's both a fun challenge and a fun period of exploration for me as a creator. I'll also note I've been singing with the National Lutheran Choir for 14, 15 years. I've lost track, a long time. So I'm very obviously steeped in and familiar with the ethos of what this event is supposed to be. So in some ways that makes my job a lot easier. But for me, it really starts with that connecting with an audience and figuring out what is it that we're trying to communicate and what is it that they need to hear and what is it they need to feel. And I think one of the really interesting parts of this process for me has been that we've been doing this as a team. So David Sherwin, the artistic director of the National Lutheran Choir, has a very specific way of programming artistically the music on the program and the readings and the poetry and all of the elements in a typical year. And so, he comes in with an idea of like, here's what we want to do. Here's sort of the overall message. And through the course of us meeting, on Zoom, having conversations about like, how do we make this work? And how do we translate this? We kind of, as a group, kind of massage it into something that we're all really happy with. One of the things that's a joy in working with this team of people is that everybody sort of has their area that they are skilled in, and everybody else lets them shine in that area. And I think that has taken a lot of time and energy and trust building and those sorts of things, because this adaptation is so strange and so different. But it's been a real joy to work on these programs and to stretch my own creative skills as a video person. This is a thing I'm constantly doing and looking to explore, like, how do we push the boundaries of what a choral program is? Not only in the virtual space, but hopefully when we get back, what does it look like in an in-person situation too? So,
well, Sarah, you really have outdone yourself in these productions, but at the Christmas festival, I'm often in the lobby greeting people when they come in for this program. And so they enter, often someone will come for the first time into this very awe-inspiring sacred space, this basilica that is designed to evoke feelings that are kind of overwhelming. And I have to say, Sarah, when I watched just this week, the way that you did the introduction to this program, and you are working with images of the heavens and of nebulas and of galaxies and of vast kind of human sense of mystery, I'm like, she is replicating that very thing in multimedia space that people feel when they walk into the church.
Yeah, that's great to hear. That was the goal.
Right. Besides this vastness of the awe-inspiring physical space, I'm curious if there are any other particular things with your particular concert and the in-person experience where you're like, wow, this is something we do every year, or that's something that's special about our ensemble in particular, that you were like, how are we going to replicate this virtually? Was there anything else like that?
Yeah, I think we should talk about, this program dates way back to the founder of the organization, so 35 years ago, and that founder's no longer with us, Dr. Larry Fleming, but David Sherwin has added to the tradition. And one of the things that is remarkable is that the components of the program generally stay the same year after year, but there's a lot of creativity in how they're executed each time. And one component is how the choir moves around this space. And David likes to use the entire space to inhabit from the very back in the choir loft up high underneath a gorgeous window to the nave, to the aisles of the cathedral. And one of the components of the program each year is that when the choir moves from the back in the choir loft to the front, there is a procession, and we have a liturgical party that goes down the center aisle. And at that point, the organ breaks loose, and there's a hymn or a carol that everybody knows and everybody's singing together. And Sara and the team found a really creative way to replicate that. Sara, you should talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so there were a couple elements to this from a technical perspective and also from this emotional perspective, right? Because we want to be not only making people feel sort of, as Tina, you alluded to, the vastness of this space, even if it was a virtual one, and kind of give that sense of wow and connection and to the universe and all of that kind of stuff. But you also want to sort of hold their hand and carry them through this journey. And so you want it to not be this song and then this song and then this song. And so you want that through line. You want them to feel comforted and know that, like, if they come along on this journey with you, they're going to experience something really different, but also really comforting, and touching that tradition that we've worked so hard for, 30, whatever you said, years, 35 years to create. And so for me, I was pulling from different things that I've seen in the virtual, especially the virtual choir space, thinking about, okay, how do you portray the choir being in a space when they're not in that space? And so one of the things that I did in a couple of the pieces is sort of take imagery from the basilica itself. We had a team of folks filming in the space for us, Flight Creative Media here in the Twin Cities. They're fabulous. And we asked them, will you please film some of just the statues and the windows and, anything that looks cool to you, get some footage of that. And so we incorporated, through the first kind of chunk of this program, we incorporated a lot of that imagery of the basilica, both because it is comforting for people who go to this program every year to see those familiar elements, but also because then what I would do is take the virtual choir, singer boxes, and instead of doing, very static, kind of two-dimensional feel, I actually overlaid them into the wall and into the window and into the space. And so you get the sense that even though the choir is not in the space, they are still in the space, which was a really kind of cool way to do that. And that all kind of leads into, as Tina mentioned, this big hymn that typically is a big processional, and everybody's singing along at the top of their lungs and the organ is going crazy. And it's a really moving moment, even as a singer after 3 concerts and you're on your 4th concert and you're ready to fall over. There's this moment where you're walking down the center aisle of this space and you're just like surrounded by people who are singing. The organ is bouncing off of all the walls and you see all this space, and it's a really, I'm like getting chills thinking about it right now. But we wanted to kind of replicate that, and give our viewers a sense for what that experience is like. And so we actually asked singers, both alumni singers, fans of the NLC, if they wanted to submit their own virtual choir video, that we would put them into this processional piece. And so it ends up being that we are all singing in this space, even though we can't all be singing in this space. And so it's
such a commentary on the time that we're in,
Mhm.
because we had the liturgical party in a socially distanced fashion be filmed walking down this aisle. So you have this sort of great cloud of people who we know and love around us, and yet you see them processing in this empty cathedral. These dear people who've done this for year after year, and it's lonely and it's big and it's evocative, and they're surrounded by our love, but it's virtually. So it as a metaphor, it works really well. And also for people who've seen this program many times, they will have that touch point on tradition that you're talking about, Mike. That's, oh, I recognize this. This is the part where actually it's the widow of our founder takes the bell tree. She's a very petite woman, but she has this tree and she shakes it over her head, and it's people will notice that and be comforted by it, I think.
This all sounds so amazing and awe-inspiring. And now I sort of want to ask and turn to Casey a bit, because then the question is, how do you pull all of this off? And Casey, I think you're particularly good at like asking those questions in a way that's like really helpful for people, no matter what level they're on, to understand what, how that they can help make these things come to
Yeah, I think,
fruition.
Sarah, my first question was, if you're inviting people that aren't necessarily members of the organization to submit videos, what do the instructions look like to those people who maybe have never sung in a choir or haven't sung in a choir in a couple of years? I know that a lot of our viewers will have probably taken the first steps, if not a lot more steps into the virtual choir realm. But people that are just starting, what kinds of things would they want to know to create something like this?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I, early on in the pandemic, kind of pivoted a little bit into this virtual choir world. I mean, nobody was doing virtual choirs before 9 months ago, but like, other than Eric Whitaker, but, and so when I was thinking about how can I be helpful in this time to organizations who are scrambling to figure out how do I have choir when I can't gather, I worked on developing some materials for folks. So actually on my website, DeveloPlay.llc.com, there's a couple of free resources that include an instruction pack that is basically, this is how you do this. Here's your instructions for your musicians. Here is how you go through submitting the videos. Here is how you go through filming. People have never filmed on their phone. And so they're like, okay, I have to have a phone, and then I have to have a computer. And then how do okay, where am I looking and what's happening? So it goes through step by step to kind of walk through, because I know a lot of singers are not, necessarily tech savvy, and, choral singers were not hoping to like sing alone in their, basement to be a part of choir. Like that was never the plan. So, the goal of that is to kind of make people feel comfortable recording and give them all the information they need in a way that is digestible and easy to understand. So that is up and freely available for anybody who wants to use it. I know there are a bunch of other people out there doing this kind of thing too, providing a lot of free resources and instructions and that sort of thing. So basically what we did for this particular piece is that we, put together an accompaniment track. We actually put together the learning tracks for all 4 voice parts. So if somebody was like, oh, I want to sing bass, but I don't feel super comfortable with that, they had a singer, a couple singers in their ear singing that part, so they could just sing along and feel like they're singing as a part of the whole. And so, yeah, it ended up being that people were able to then submit and, follow the instructions. And yeah, I mean, I think in terms of tips for folks, if you can keep the instructions as simple and straightforward as possible, that helps a lot. And, there are a couple of different ways to build either your accompaniment track that can help singers as well. So one of the things I typically do for my clients is build that accompaniment track so that it has the instructions built in. So a singer clicks play and they're watching and seeing the screen, and it says, okay, make sure that you hit record on your phone now. Okay, hit record, go. And then it kind of walks through everything. And in terms of alignment, I know a lot of people talk about like, well, how do you make sure that everything is aligned, and how do you line up everybody's videos and those sorts of things? There are a couple of tricks I've seen work pretty well. I tend to use the countdown method. So on the screen, it'll say these numbers out loud with me. and then it'll see 3, and you'll say, okay, 3, 2, 1, start. Okay, because then I have that in the audio file to kind of help line things up a little bit. I've also seen other people use a clap. So if they're doing a video, like a conducting video, they may clap and ask all their singers to clap as well, because that again puts a spike in the audio, which makes things easier to line up. So a couple of things like that are kind of tricks of the trade, I'd say, to kind of make that a little bit easier. Clear instructions and, some sort of way to help line everything up. Your audio and video producers will be very grateful for that.
With this kind of a production and a performance, is there maybe 1 or 2 particular things that you think this version is slightly better than doing it live? Are there things that you can embrace in this that obviously we miss being together, we miss singing and hearing the acoustics of the space, but what are the benefits of doing something like this virtually?
Well, I'll jump in on that real quickly. Just, one of our strategic goals as an organization for a long time has been to live into the national part of our name. And we are a choir that is primarily volunteer singers, so we can't be on the road, weeks and weeks out of the year. We do usually one fairly jam-packed tour a year, usually hitting about 4 different cities. But with virtual, we actually can touch those audiences again where we've been on tour, and followers who are interested in staying current with us can be part of these traditions. So you mentioned All Saints a little bit earlier. For us, that's one of my favorite concerts of the year that we do. You really don't have to be a very religious person in any way to appreciate what this concert is about. It is having the name of someone you love read and integrated into the most beautiful music you can imagine. And it's so meaningful. So this year with virtual, we were able to take names from people all over the country. And I think there were so many names that came in. I think there were close to 500. I mean, Sara had to find a way to fit them into this program. But it was overwhelming in that sense. And that was a wonderful example. You probably have some others too, Sara.
Yeah, that's definitely one for me that that was both a production challenge and also a core element of what All Saints is about. It is about remembering the person that you've lost. And so, Mike, you talked earlier about one of the traditions in your church community is to ring a bell, for all the names of the people who have passed in your church community. And in some ways, the reading of the names in our traditional concerts, or in this case, the presentation of a name, is that acknowledgement. And so we wanted to make sure that that was open to all who wanted to participate in that. From a production standpoint, it was like, how do you do this with this like lovely, soothing music and not have it feel like names are just coming at you all the time? So, you want to make sure that you're giving each name its due while also making it feel like it fits within the flow of the program. So that was an interesting production challenge, but I think we did okay with it. The other thing I will say in terms of your question, one of the things that I think you can do in a virtual space that is harder in an in-person space is this element of visual storytelling. So we typically, for these programs, we have used not only stock imagery, but also animations and some of those sorts of things that we've created internally to really tell not only a musical story, but also a visual one. So you can really kind of hammer home some of those like heart-wrenching moments with a very thoughtfully chosen photo or video clip that just kind of gets to the heart of what you're trying to communicate. But it also opens up opportunities for representation in a way that I think is really powerful, because you can convey that sort of connection to all people in a visual way, and acknowledge that we are all experiencing, especially in this case of the pandemic, we are all experiencing incredible hardship, and what does that look like? And also grappling with a lot of the racial injustice kinds of things. Like it opens up doors to tell that story and to encourage your audience to enter into that story with you. The other thing I will say that has been a real fun part of all of this for me, we, and Tina, maybe you can talk a little bit more about how this came to be, but the National Lutheran Choir has an artist in residence this season, Paul John Rudoy, who is a composer here in the Twin Cities. You're both nodding. I was like, I'm pretty sure you know Paul. He's great. Paul. We love Paul. But he was tasked with writing a couple of pieces for the All Saints program. And so we were not only, doing world premieres of new works in a pandemic, but also Paul, because of his artistry and his technical prowess, wrote them for a virtual space. So they are meant to be kind of, and they come from this time of us being distant. And so the themes that he wrestles with in the music, and also the way that he uses, it sounds electronic. It's not actually, it's all human voice. I found this out after the fact. I was like, oh, I didn't know that. But he adds these elements that are electronic sounding that really set up an interesting sort of dichotomy between this beautiful choral line and sort of the tension and grind of this this sort of almost anxiety producing sound. And the whole point of that was sort of wrestling with this theme of what it feels like when you can't catch your breath, because breath, obviously, this summer and fall has been a major thing on all of our minds for both racial injustice reasons and also for the pandemic reasons. Breath is something that we are all more aware of. And so he wrote this piece with the idea of, how do we convey that tension that you feel when you can't catch your breath, and then also the sort of relaxing understanding that like you're going to be okay and that you are okay, child of God kind of connotation. So it's a really interesting piece. And so for me as the visual artist behind this, I was like, how am I going to convey this? But that really allowed me to play around with these different visual effects in a way that I had never tried before. And after creating that thing, I was like, well, that's the best thing I've ever made. So it was really fascinating working with a living composer and working with somebody who's writing in this time. And also as a creator who is living in this time, bringing my own perspective on what's happening in the world to this piece. It was really fabulous. The piece is called Breathe on Me, Breath of God. And it's wonderful. And it was such a joy to create with Paul. So that would be something that wouldn't exist in an in-person space. So.
Right. And I think as an organization, we're all really proud of that. George Floyd was murdered just blocks from where our choir rehearses. So that event, along with COVID, along with a summer of just hurt and then the wildfires out west and the feeling of suffering and losing breath, it all took on just a huge significance for everybody in the organization. So the All Saints program really was memorializing those people who submitted names, but it was also really a gift for everybody who was suffering. And I think Paul's dedication on Breathe on Me was for those who are given less.
For those who need more breath than they are given.
Yeah. And the things that Sara did as far as imagery with that were really cool. Puffs of air, swirls of shapes, swaying grass. So there is a way to deepen, the experience. So it is not just listening, it's also seeing. And that sort of steps, as choral artists, that we step into a whole different dimension with that.
Well, that is so beautiful how that all came together, and congratulations, Sara, and to you both and all of you on bringing it all together in that project. Another thing that's tough about our traditions that we hold dear, that I wanted to make sure to ask about, which gets at something we haven't talked about yet, is that they touch so many people, they bring so many people to our organizations that they bring in a lot of money to support what we do. And when those traditions have to change, that really brings things into question as far as how we can operate and all of that, including something like a gala or a big fundraising event or something like that is really specifically designed to bring in money, but that is also a tradition that provides an experience that people find valuable, and that's why they support it. And so, especially now we have even more demands on our budget for so many reasons. And I know it's got to be such a challenge of threading that needle to realize that, but also, acknowledge reality, and somehow adapt this kind of tradition so that it can continue to support what you do and be meaningful. And I think you had to make this decision about what to do with your gala so early in this pandemic.
Right. Our gala was April 19th, which was really just, only a few weeks after everybody shut down. And it was really a scramble, and it was very early. And I feel like we took a few risks, and they ended well for us. And, this coming year is going to be a totally different story. If we do something again in the spring, which we have to for financial reasons, we may be coming out the other side, but not entirely out. So whereas the 2020 gala was entirely virtual, it's possible that our 2021 gala will be more of a hybrid event. But for 2020, we were really threading the needle of needing to ask for support, but also feeling uncertain about how that would come off in the very beginning of the pandemic, when people in New York were suffering so greatly, when our healthcare workers were putting their lives on the line to save others. How could we be asking for money for what we do? I mean, I think there was a little bit of kind of guilt around that. But we did, and the response was overwhelmingly positive. And so humbling, that the people who love and support our organizations truly want us to be there on the other side, and they recognize the hit that we are all taking from ticket revenue and performance fees and other sources of earned income that simply are not possible to pursue this year. I think as far as traditions and that event, one really important thing for us is that over the last 5 years, or maybe a little bit more, we've had this part of our gala called the Fund the Mission, which is really just the generosity portion. And we knew if there was one thing we had to draw on or reactivate, it was that tradition right there, the part where we tell you what we need and you decide if you can open your pocketbook and write a check or not. So that was a part of the tradition we absolutely retained, and it worked well.
I think from the production side, there were several things that we were juggling. It was, as Tina mentioned, this need of like, how do you thread that needle of asking in this time and in this space? But from my perspective, in terms of how do you produce this, we had live elements, we had pre-produced stuff, but it was all about this theme of gathering and togetherness in a time when we couldn't be. Early on in the pandemic, we were all feeling that so keenly and so much. And so it was, how do we provide a sense that we are together apart, and do that in a meaningful way and tell the story of the organization, but also having it be very audience focused. It wasn't so much about the National Lutheran Choir, I would say. It was more about how do we craft an event that people feel held in, and feel supported in this time. And I think that also lended itself well to kind of eliciting some of that generosity. So when I talk to clients and potential clients, I say, it doesn't have to be the highest production value if the story is right. And if you're thoughtful about your audience and you're thoughtful about what they need and how they are coming to you. Are they coming to you exhausted because they're a healthcare worker who's been working on the front lines for 9 months? If so, think about what it is that they might need from you as an arts organization. Like, why is your art essential right now? And telling that story, not only through sharing your art and sharing your music, especially, and as we're talking about choral art specifically, what stories does that music tell, and what does that music give to people, and how do you make sure that you are giving that music in a time when it is so desperately needed?
Well, those are such wonderful points, Sara, and thank you for bringing everything back together, and connecting the emotional and the logistical sides of all of this as we're trying to do the very best we can, and celebrate what we have to be thankful for. I'm really looking forward to National Lutheran Choir's program that debuts on December 11th, on Friday, which by the time you see this, it will be out in the world.
Woohoo.
Yes, and it will be available on our website at nlca.com throughout the season, and probably whenever you want to see it. So
Well, that's fantastic. I'm wishing you both the best, the very best holiday seasons.
you guys too.
Thank you. You too. It was a pleasure talking with you.
Very
And
much.
same to you. It's always a pleasure. And to everyone watching as well, happy holidays. We're with you and can't wait to talk to you again soon.